with the scent of potpourri, films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including my written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. This week on Patreon, I have started my read-along review series for the new Stephen King collection of short stories, You Like It Darker. So that is going up hopefully each day this week on Patreon, and very excited about it because new Stephen King is always a good thing. Once again, you can sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for all of that and a bunch more content. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, including Letterboxd, at the username of ObsessiveViewer. And later in the show, I'll be reviewing the new comedy from Pamela Adlon, Babes. But before that, we're going to go over some movie news and then review the new film from writer-director Chris Nash, In a Violent Nature, in a non-spoiler and spoiler feature review. And back in fall of 2005, I met the person joining me for this review. And in that time, I found a locket in his closet and I kept it, and he has pursued me ever since.
Yeah. I rose from the grave.
Exactly.
And chased after him forever, saying, "Find out."
Yes. Nice. Deep cut.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the show, one of the OG co-hosts of the Obsessive Viewer podcast, and my dear friend, Michael White. Mike, how are you doing this evening?
Hey, Matt, I'm great. You know what's funny this time of year? So it's graduation season. It's the end of the school year. I'm a teacher. Shout out to longtime listeners, giving you a little bit of lore.
Yep.
So I'm a teacher, and every year I have students going to college, and I always ask them if they're going to live at home, or are they staying, or if they're going to live on campus and move into the college that they go to. And it's kind of an even split nowadays. And I let them kind of make their own choices, obviously, right. and encourage. What I mean is I encourage whatever path that they choose, but yeah. I definitely nudge a little bit, like, hey, you try to live on campus, try to live away from home for a little bit, because it's great. And they're like, so I had a few students this year who were like, I'm scared to move in with someone I don't know or don't like. And I was like, well, you know what's interesting is I went in with randos, like I didn't know the people that I was going to live with. And my roommate, I just got randomly paired with still one of my best friends to this day, who I talk to on a near daily basis. So you never know.
How is Colin doing, by the way?
Shout out to Colin, wherever you may be.
Yes.
Eugene, wherever you are. We love you.
Yes. But, even though there's no fucking way you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah. No way.
Way. No, but yeah, that's one of the things that we don't really talk. Well, I don't really talk much about like college or anything, but like I was there for 1 year. I never completed college or anything. I'm a self-made man. But I will say, like, if I were in a position to give any kind of advice to anyone that is questioning whether or not to go to someplace else or go like live like somewhere new, like, it is unreal to me that, first of all, like, just me 20 years ago, close to 20 years ago, like the level to which I had severe anxiety over just getting that far out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, I remember.
Like, yeah. Oh, yeah. And like, I can understand people having that, like, I can understand more than most, like, people having those reservations, but like, that is, if I could give one piece of advice to the class of 2024, like, break out of that comfort zone as in any way that you can, because it is like you will thank yourself in the long run.
And if you can find someone who also likes 80s and 90s TV and movies,
yes,
that also doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Put full faith in the university's ability to randomly match you up with someone. And if you happen to room with someone who just has a case of just obnoxious fucking Criterion collection DVDs without really understanding really how like obnoxious that is, give them a fair chance, because you might talk to them on a microphone every now and then.
We're losing the thread here.
We
guys,
are.
We're talking about us.
Yes. In case you guys didn't know.
We're reminiscing.
Yes.
Join us.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, I'm glad to have you on, Mike, for In a Violent Nature, which I'm very excited to talk to you about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because here's the thing. And we'll get to the review in a bit, because I do have one piece of news I want to talk about. But before we do that, here's the thing. I had this experience when browsing Letterboxd that it kind of hit a little bit of nostalgia for me for the early days of the podcast. And that is, I saw your check-in to In a Violent Nature, and I saw no rating, no review, just a check-in. And like, that reminded me of like when me, you, and Tiny would do a podcast, and like we wouldn't tell each other like how we felt about it. Like that just, I don't know, that just put me in a nice nostalgic mood. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts, I should say.
You know what's funny? This is super dorky and whatever. But I took the no review embargo so seriously that I was like, I'm not even going to put stars yet, because the movie's not out yet.
I totally understand that. Yeah. If this movie hadn't been at Sundance and other people hadn't already posted reviews, I would have probably done the same.
The same. Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha. So is the horror news you're talking about unrelated to In a Violent Nature, or are we starting?
It's unrelated, and it's not horror news. It's just movie news. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into that.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go ahead and bring up the news before the reviews, is the segment, I guess is what I'm calling it. But it was announced the other day that the third Knives Out movie is going to be titled Wake Up, Dead Man, a Knives Out Mystery, and it is slated for release in 2025. And just today, it was announced that Josh O'Connor and Kaylee Spaney are going to be joining Daniel Craig in the movie. So the first casting announcements. I'm not sure who exactly Josh O'Connor is, but Kaylee Spaney is having a hell of a run with Priscilla and Civil War, to name just a couple of credits. But Mike, I wanted to get your read on this news, and also like, where are you at with Knives Out? How did you feel about Glass Onion? How did you feel about the first Knives Out movie? And what's your excitement or lack thereof for Wake Up, Dead Man?
Yeah, gosh, that's a lot of questions.
It is. Welcome to the obsessive viewer.
Yeah, right. I love Knives Out a lot. Very much so. I remember walking out of the theater after that movie and being so hyped for it that I kind of left a little bit underwhelmed, just because I felt like there would be more twistiness. I don't know.
For Knives Out or Glass Onion?
For Knives Out.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
Maybe I have this chip on my shoulder against Rian Johnson. I don't know what it is. And Glass Onion, I kind of felt the same way. I liked it a lot, but I didn't. It didn't seem to like bowl me over the same way that it did with a lot of people last year. I think people really, really, really love these movies, like favorite. And I like them a lot. So I saw this news and thought, yeah, I'm in. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun, but I don't know that it'll. It won't be like most anticipated for me.
Gotcha. And, I can understand that kind of chip on your shoulder about Rian Johnson, just because, I mean, when you make the perfect movie for a franchise to the point where you don't even need to watch any further stuff.
And what franchise is Brick a part of? The Joseph Gordon-Levitt
nice
universe?
Saga? Well done. But yeah. but anyway, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting that Knives Out didn't bowl you over too much. I was in love with Knives Out from the moment I saw it. Glass Onion, it was better on repeat viewings for me. I felt like the ensemble wasn't quite as strong as Knives Out's ensemble. Plus, the mystery wasn't quite as tight as it was as Knives Out.
Right.
Which, honestly, like I feel like when you have something that, in my opinion, is as strong as Knives Out, it is so hard to top it.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Yeah, but I did like a lot of things about Glass Onion. It's not something that I've been compelled to revisit since it came out, really. I've seen it a couple of times, and I don't remember if it made my top 10. I'm sure it probably did. But nonetheless, I'm very excited because I remember with Glass Onion, when time came that it came out and everything, I remember just thinking I would be content with Daniel Craig and Rian Johnson just making these movies forever.
Yeah, I think you've said that on this podcast.
Absolutely.
And I want to clarify, I have since watched Knives Out a couple times at home since, and I do think it's kind of a modern classic. I think it's a movie people talk about in the future. It is great. There is just something about Rian Johnson's movies that just are just close to perfect, close to what I love in a movie. I've since tried to love Looper a bunch of times, and I just can't get it. It's hard to explain, and if I feel like I'm kind of like stumbling over my words here, it's because I haven't even really put words to this thought or this feeling. But Looper is like my perfect example. It's like a microcosm for my feelings toward Rian Johnson as a whole. Everything about it screams that I should love this movie. It is perfect for me, right? It's a time traveling crime thriller, and it's just not. I've watched it a couple times, and I just can't nudge it into my top favorites. And for whatever reason, and again, I can't even put words to the feelings. That's how I feel about Knives Out. I do think, kind of like you said, I think Glass Onion is a lesser movie. So I don't know. Maybe with Rian Johnson, I'm just waiting for the perfect movie. You know, you joked earlier about The Last Jedi, and I've said things on this podcast and have thought about that movie a lot. I think that movie is near greatness as well, but it just has that Rian Johnson thing that I don't know. I just can't explain it. It's just not quite. For me, all of his movies are just not quite, and I don't know what it is.
That is a lot more easy to understand than I think you're giving yourself credit for. I totally get, I totally get what you mean with that. Like I'm hard pressed to think of any examples of my own of like filmmakers that are like that for me. But I definitely know that feeling. Like I absolutely know that feeling.
There's a je ne sais quoi sometimes when you see a movie. When I think of my favorite movies, I almost can't exactly explain what makes a movie in my top 50 and not in my top 200 or whatever.
Right.
And I'm just picking random numbers. But when Knives Out came out, Ready or Not came out either that year or like within 12 months of that movie.
It was that same year. Yeah.
And I think if you polled 100 people, 90 of them would say Knives Out is the better movie. And is there such a thing as objectively? Maybe there is. I could maybe even admit that Knives Out is the better movie. But when Ready or Not ends, when that movie is finished, I get that ching. I feel the je ne sais quoi. I go, oh, this movie is one of my favorite movies. And I just don't with Rian Johnson. I don't know why.
That is totally fair. So we'll have you on for Wake Up Dead Man.
I mean, gladly, absolutely will.
I do hope that it clicks for you. I'm excited, but then again, also I haven't really like Knives Out was something special for me because that was a movie that it became like a comfort like rewatch movie, a movie that I would throw on in the background. That I would just watch numerous times. And Glass Onion never really clicked together for me in that way. I saw it a couple of times. Also, I think that also has some like extenuating issues that like this is a tangent. I think my Roku is like on the fritz or is I think it's ending its tenure as a Roku
he
device.
Had a good run. He was a good boy.
He was, but the reason I say that is because, and it's only Netflix. It's only Netflix that does this, but Netflix will be a crapshoot as to whether or not it will play something. Like if I go and play, it'll freeze, and I'll have to shut down the entire Roku and just hope that it works.
And we're just fine with that. Welcome to the streaming era.
Yep.
We're just fine with that.
Yes, we are just fine with that. There's no gun to my head. No, but yeah, it is the bane of my existence. But yeah. So anyway, we'll see what happens with Wake Up Dead Man. I was kind of hoping that it would be this year, but apparently it's going to be in 2025. But hey, however much time they need to make it as best they can is fine by me.
Yep.
Yeah. That's really all the news that I have before the reviews this week. Mike, any news items or anything that popped up in pop culture that you want to talk about before we get to the review, or shall we go ahead and get into In a Violent Nature?
Not that I think I can think of. Let's do it.
Nice. Alrighty. So as is normally the case, this is the feature review. We're going to do a non-spoiler review and spoiler review. And to separate out the non-spoiler from spoiler, I will play a clip from the trailer, and also you can check out the show notes. Those show notes are at obsessiveviewer.com/OV430. In a Violent Nature is in theaters now. If you're listening to this day of release, it is May 31st. It opened in theaters, and with previews on May 30th, of course. And it is going to be on Shudder later this year. The premise, according to IMDb, is when a locket is removed from a collapsed fire tower in the woods that entombs the rotting corpse of Johnny, a vengeful spirit spurred on by a horrific 60-year-old crime, his body is resurrected and becomes hellbent on retrieving it. Writer and director for this movie was Chris Nash, and the cast includes Rye Barrett, Andrea Pavlovic, Cameron Love, Reese Presley, Liam Leone, and Charlotte Cregan. So Mike, I am very excited to talk to you about In a Violent Nature because this is very much a movie that is something
Definitely.
I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
So, what was your expectations for this movie, and how did you feel about it in non-spoilers?
Yeah. Let me just start by saying, like, we have to grade this movie on a curve, right? Like, I think if you don't care for horror, if you don't care for slashers, really, if you don't love the source material that this movie is like an inversion of, I think, and you can push back on me if you want, I think you'll hate this movie. Like, there's almost nothing by the way of characters or plot. It's also like 10 minutes longer than the movies that like it's inspired by and kind of referencing. If you are not the audience, you won't like this movie. But we are the target audience for this movie. Guys like you and I. And so my anticipation for it was pretty high, I think.
Nice.
IFC Film. It will go into theaters, but then the deal with Shudder was kind of immediately announced, so I knew it would be on Shudder right away. And it is kind of not so, excuse me, it hasn't been spoken, but it's also not so subtly pretty much a Friday the 13th ripoff.
Oh, yeah.
Which we love horror because it just eats itself. Friday the 13th is just a ripoff of Halloween.
Yep.
And so In a Violent Nature is a ripoff of really like Friday the 13th part 2, 3, and 6, I think. And so my anticipation was pretty high because it's not a spoiler to say the movie is from the over-the-shoulder perspective of the killer for about 80% of the movie. And you watch a Friday the 13th-esque movie from the perspective of the killer's shoulders. I really liked it a lot.
Nice. I'm so glad to hear you say that. I loved it too. I ended up rating it 4 stars. I was very much anticipating this movie for those reasons. I did a few years ago, obviously famously did my homework in watching all of the Friday the 13th movies when the Scream Factory box set came out. We did a whole episode about it.
Yes.
And like that primed me for this. But but it is a unique take on the slasher genre and 80s slasher in particular. And one of the things that I really am kind of enamored by with regard to the horror genre is how it is able, and maybe this is more just me talking about, my love of Scream, or maybe this is why this is burned into my perception of the horror genre, but the way that the horror genre can lovingly and critically examine itself in various ways and pay homage to itself, subvert expectations of itself while still being a wholly unique experience. So that's kind of how I felt while watching In a Violent Nature. There's one thing that I mentioned in my Letterboxd review that I kind of figure maybe we can get it out of the way up top because it kind of bugs me a little bit. I haven't read anything from Chris Nash in terms of interviews or anything, but it's weird to me. Like this didn't factor into my enjoyment or not enjoyment of any aspect of the movie, but it did eat at me a little bit that in 2020 it was highly publicized in horror circles that Stephen King had given an interview where he said that he had the idea for a novel set from in the Friday the 13th universe, set from the perspective of Jason.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and like that just kind of
you would know
a
about this because it was in the Stephen King orbit.
And that's the thing. That's why I'm kind of hesitant to bring it up because it's like, yeah, obviously I'm going to know about it because I know what Stephen King had for breakfast because I am obsessed with the man. But like, this was something that was covered on Bloody Disgusting. It was covered in mainstream circles in the press. And like, it was to the point where I watched through all the credits to see if they gave like a special thanks to Stephen King or something.
Interesting.
They didn't, but ultimately it doesn't factor into my enjoyment of the movie whatsoever. It's just something that it was at the back of my mind.
Was in the back of my mind was like all of the Friday the 13th legal issues. Mm-hmm. So Friday the 13th really had a moment in 2017, 2018, 19 a little bit with the video game came back out, the Dead Meat YouTube channel was covering Friday the 13th at the same time. The legal battle was getting super heated, so Friday the 13th was kind of in the news a lot. I think even LeBron James production company was talking about making a new Friday the 13th movie. That could never have happened because of the legal issues, but whatever. But there was, it was really a shame that they couldn't strike while the iron was hot because it felt like it was hot for Friday the 13th. I don't know how the mainstream felt about it, but definitely inside horror circles, Friday the 13th was having another moment, which would have been when the script for this movie was coming together. And I wonder how much of it was maybe that Stephen King influence, but how much of it was like, well, people want a Friday the 13th movie right now, so let's give it to them.
Yeah. Yep. That it's all a moot point, really, because the movie it's like a cow's opinion. It's moo. But moo. No, it is something that ultimately doesn't really factor in too much with it, and it's not like Stephen King was shopping around a script or anything. He was just like, hey, I have an idea for a novel. Like, I have a million of them. So,
right. Yeah.
But I wanted to just bring that up just to have it on the record so I don't lose my constant reader status, or tower junkie status.
It was he has a whole outline for it. It's typed out. It's in the drawer underneath Carrie.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so
but we can't ignore the Friday the 13th influence.
Oh no.
And I think that's where we could kind of work our way into this movie. Yep. Because it is, I mean, the setup is Friday the 13th.
Oh, it is Friday the 13th in everything except name and some of the lore, basically.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Like, in terms of homage versus like ripoff, like where is that line of delineation for you?
I think that's tough, and that's a tough question. I can see myself being angered by like something being a ripoff about other things, and I don't know. There's something about Friday the 13th that like it being a ripoff is like makes it okay to rip it off. I don't think Friday the 13th is holy scripture.
Sure.
Sean Cunningham didn't invent the idea of telling campfire stories and there's like a scary man with a knife in the woods. He didn't come up with that idea. So why not? Why not play with, in another so many years, it'll be public domain and then why not? Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So they're just kind of beating public domain to the punch. It's like I don't know that you can get mad at them for ripping off.
It helps that the movie's good.
Because of the setting. Yeah. It is good, yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I kind of came down on with it in terms of my feelings toward the movie was that it is.
Is it good? What makes it good? Go ahead.
What makes it good is that lovingness toward the genre, like that. Yeah. Like it is self-referential in terms of being a send-up, being not self-aware, but being aware behind the camera of what it's doing in terms of what it's drawing influence from. But the thing that I really like about it, the thing that I found that really drew me into it was that it is like it's playing in this sandbox, this very specific sandbox of 80s slasher movies, Friday the 13th. It is playing in that sandbox. And instead of satirizing it or parodying it or poking fun at it, it is presenting this new perspective from the perspective of an immortal killing machine.
Right, literally.
Yeah. And in doing that, it's also finding interesting ways to pay homage to the characters of these slasher movies, this slasher genre, the archetypes of these characters, while still giving us the information. And that I think is what kind of stands out the most to me, is that yes, the log line of the movie is this killer, it's the perspective of the killer going around killing people, but like through dialogue, like through the dialogue that he's overhearing, like in brief moments, like we get enough characterization about these people that we know like the archetypes. We don't know enough about them as characters, but we don't need to, because it's an 80s style slasher movie. Like we don't, they're knife fodder.
So talking about the characters, and I almost feel like I could go to, and maybe I'm just, I don't know, like it's my argumentative nature. It's almost like I want to go through what a person who doesn't like horror movies wouldn't like about this movie and explain why those things are purposeful and actually effective. And because you begin with the characters, the complaint would be the characters are nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There is no development. There's barely a plot. The dialogue is bad. Bad characters, bad acting,
mm-hmm.
bad. What I love about that is being told from the perspective of the killer is you hear how innocuous and unimportant and idiotic these conversations are in his periphery,
mm-hmm.
right? Like this is what it's like overhearing. There's even a moment, and I hope this isn't too spoilery, where you hear like characters making a plan, and he just hears them making that plan.
that killed me. That was amazing.
It was hilarious, and the movie is not overly jokey. I think that's one of maybe 2 or 3 other.
Yeah. This is not the Cabin in the Woods. This is not a full-on parody.
Cabin in the Woods. No. It's not. There's really. It's not a funny movie at all.
No.
But that was perfect. I mean,
my God.
We've seen that scene so many times, not just in Friday the 13th, but
mm-hmm.
in every Woods movie. I mean, Wrong Turn, Joyride, you name it, 100 times. And to hear that the killers just always hear it, it's so great. And it's almost like, not to give them too much credit, not to give too much credit to that scene in particular, but like that to me was the movie's answer for why all of these conversations are so pointless
mm-hmm.
and unimaginative dialogue and kind of like roll your eye. It's like, if you were from his perspective, these idiotic early 20-somethings, let's just kill them because they're stupid.
Yeah. And what I found so refreshing about this, and maybe not refreshing because I was kind of expecting this going into it, but when it became clear, like right from the outset, that we are in, like, obviously we're in the perspective of the killer. That was no secret going into it. But not only are we in the perspective of the killer, but it is 100% a mood piece. It is atmosphere. It is creating this sense of dread and fear and atmosphere and ambiance, to where when we get, like, I think the sound design in this movie is incredible, because like even when we get like the dialogue through from the characters, it's like we hear pieces of it in some points, and like we can't really hear that well like what's going on, but we get the gist of it. There are some cases where it works a little bit better than others, like the first one where he kind of goes to the guy's house and he's having the argument with the ranger. That felt like a little bit too purposefully written.
Yeah.
To set up what happens next. But it was a good introductory piece to the vibe of the movie, so I can't fault it too bad for that. Yeah. But just really interesting cleverness in terms of the writing and how it uses its unique perspective to still deliver, like, by all accounts, if this movie was from the perspective of the protagonist, like, this is, like you said, it is a Friday the 13th movie. This would fit incredibly well within that franchise in that time too.
Yep.
And I think that is probably the biggest, like, achievement that this movie makes and is that it's not only paying homage to something that clearly Chris Nash was very heavily influenced by and is a fan of, but it is doing so in a way that would stand out within that exact framework. So, yeah.
Well, a quick aside about Friday the 13th, just because I love it so much. Well, and it's kind of related anyway. I think that Friday the 13th works best episodically. I think some of the through lines, like the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, and that they loosely try to tie all the movies together, is pretty ineffectual and kind of unimportant. When I find Friday the 13th is best is when it's like, this is the next adventure of Jason, or this is the next campfire story, or whatever. And there is a script for a Friday the 13th movie, Friday the 13th 3D, that never got made by Nick Antosca. And it's kind of on the internet. It's available. You can find it anywhere. And it's great. And it treats Jason like this campfire story, like just a legend in the woods. And this, I would not be surprised to find that the creators of this movie are familiar with that script or also believe that perspective of Jason. I wrote an article in 2019 celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the 2009 remake because that was like the longest we had gone without a Friday the 13th movie. That still continues. It's now 15 years. Anyway, and most of the comments that I received, or at least the positive feedback I received on that article, was that it was my perspective on Jason being this kind of legend. And I think that that's the way forward with Friday the 13th. And I just am curious if, I don't know, the creators of this movie read that article or kind of caught wind of that notion of Jason being a legend and that it works best episodically. Anyway, so I think maybe the biggest criticism of this movie, and it's not my criticism, but if we're playing the game of like, what would a person not like about this movie, is that there are long walking shots.
Yes.
Do you want to comment that on do you want to rebut that as an issue at all, or what?
So here's the kind of common thing that I've seen kind of critiquing it is that yes, there is a lot of walking. It is a lot of, so much so that like it's like an interesting like time lapse effect where it's just cutting to like advancing further in the walking.
Yes. Right.
And some of the comments that I've seen is that, which I have no hate toward this comments at all, but like I just like people saying that like, you know, if I wanted to play the Friday the 13th video game, I would just play the Friday the 13th video game, which like honestly, I mean, I honestly feel like that's a valid criticism. If the
Friday the 13th game moves a little quicker than this movie.
Well, yeah. And plus, I feel like you can't really play it anymore. Is that right? I don't know. Anyway.
You can play it. I think you can play locally and you can play, you can make lobbies with friends up until I think December. And then after that, it's dead.
Okay. Gotcha.
Which is a shame. How much do we want to talk about Friday the 13th? Because that summer when that game came out, I love that game. It's one of my favorite video games of all time.
Nice.
It's so good. It's so great.
I played like a tiny bit of it, but I came like way at the end of like its like predominant run, I guess. So I kind of missed the boat on that.
Is it too much walking for you? Are there too many walking scenes?
For me, no. But I totally understand, and I respect the opinion of people that feel like it's too much. For me, that built up the atmosphere, built up the sense of not even dread, because it's a more fun kind of atmosphere and horror element. It's not like a psychological horror or anything. It's like, okay, I want to see him just rip these kids apart. And the walking, like, I think the thing that I honed in on it is the sound design. It is incredibly atmospheric and it drew me in, and I totally understand if it doesn't draw you in. I did mean to bring this up real quick. I was very disappointed because I watched this. We had screeners for it. I watched it yesterday. As of this recording, like yesterday was Sunday. I intentionally waited because storms were coming in, and I was very excited. I put on my Halloween pajamas from Target, and I got on my recliner. I had like the new spiced Coke in my water thing, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna watch this. And then it stormed for 10 minutes, and then it was like back to normal. So I was like, okay, well, there goes the atmosphere. But But the movie did draw me in. The atmosphere is great. The sound design worked for me incredibly well. And even though it takes a little bit of time before we really get to the really good stuff in terms of the gore and the action or the horror, I was still wrapped up into it because I was engaged by it.
There are also just some great shots. There's one shot of like a lake, maybe call it Crystal Lake, where there's kind of like some mist coming off the water. And I don't know, it's just shot well. And I agree that it's not so much dreadful because there's also no score in this movie. Right. There's no music at all. And so, you know, it's the sounds of walking and like cicadas and birds. And yeah, it worked for me. I think maybe you could have cut 2 minutes of walking from this movie.
Probably.
And it might have felt a little snappier. But I definitely was not like, oh man, this movie drags, because between walking scenes are some absolutely gnarly murder. so
good. Yeah.
One like I've never seen before.
Nice. Okay, I'm curious which one. We'll talk in more detail and spoilers for those, but I will say that the campfire scene, where we get like an exposition dump, we get a lot of detail about the kids, the group of people that are at the cabin. I found that really intriguing and well done because it breaks away from the perspective of the killer and just does this circular like shot that's like mostly one continuous take, and it's just you hear the characters talking. I don't know if it's was all truly one take or if some of it was ADR'd because of the way the camera's placed. But
well, I think sorry to cut you off real quick. You're good. There's a lot of times where they had a body come in front of the camera. I think there's a kill later on in the movie where there's probably a cut there. It just kind of always, I think if you have a back to the camera,
it's almost certainly ADR.
It's a cut.
Yeah, which I'm fine with. But that whole sequence was, it's an archetype of it's a typical scene from this type of movie, but it's just so, there was something so fun about it because I knew that we weren't with these characters. Like this movie is positioning itself where we're not with these characters for a long period of time. Like we are from the perspective of the killer. So when we get these like little bits of dialogue, I think it's done really economically and really well at just showing what these characters are, what type of people they are when we don't really need to know much about them. And also just giving us the exposition dump of the lore of Johnny. It's really good.
So that scene is very much Friday the 13th Part 2. Which is kind of the first and the best time that was ever done in the franchise. So I think this movie's heavily, if you were to guess, pick a movie, it's Friday the 13th Part 2, which is the best one. And then I also think, so you rated this 4 stars, and I think I'm going to give it 3.5.
Nice.
I think there's moments that are, I think they could have made the characters a tad more endearing. They're purposefully underwritten, in that we're supposed to get the sense that they don't matter, right? We're just going to watch these people die.
Right.
But there are moments where it feels like they're leaning toward realism rather than parody, and it is pretty bad. Some of the dialogue is just poorly written, actually, and not well performed either. You know, I think Friday the 13th, those movies were considered bad movies back in the day, right? I mean, those were trash movies with considered bad performances and bad dialogue, but I think why those movies endure is because there is a charm there and there is a realism in some of those. This one there were a couple moments where I was just like, it feels like they're going for cheesy rather than just being cheesy.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. And I know that I talked about how...
Or maybe the other way around. Maybe it's just cheesy rather than going for cheesy. I think that's what I mean to say.
I feel like there is an element to the movie where there are certain aspects, like you've referenced, that are kind of built as if the movie is parodying its subject matter, like what its influences, but for whatever reason, it's not. I don't know if it's a thing where the filmmaker didn't want to go that deep into it, didn't want to go that full into self-awareness or self-parody or what have you, or wanted to hold back because because of the reverence that he had for the source material that he's treading in or playing in. I didn't have much of a problem with those elements to it because I think for me it was just a part of the ride. I reconciled that with it being something that isn't necessarily something to take too seriously, like the more silly aspects of the characters' actions, their dialogue, their reactions to things. I kind of just chalked that up to part of the experience. So I didn't really have much of an issue with it, but I'm curious what it would do on repeat viewings for me. Because a big part of it is that kind of the sheen of this unique concept, this unique thing that Stephen King had 4 years ago. But this unique take on this specific type of horror movie. So yeah.
One last bit of criticism before I really kind of sum up what I really did love about this movie quite a bit. And this is weird criticism because I don't even want to sound like that guy. This sounds gross, and I'm really not this type of person, but part of, I think, the charm of the Friday the 13th movies was the sleaziness of it. Specifically drug use and nudity. And so many modern slashers shy away from that. And I wonder if it's just they're just trying to cater to modern sensibilities, if they're acknowledging some of the faults of the past, some of the real misogyny that we are trying to walk away from and avoids, definitely objectification. But it was such a part of the Friday the 13th experience and horror movies in the 80s altogether, the nudity and drug use, that I'm surprised that there's almost none of it in this one. And if that is a conscious effort, if I'm a weird, gross sleazeball for noticing that it's not there, or is it maybe not as tied to that experience as I thought it was?
No, I think you're right on the money. And there was an article earlier this month on Hollywood Reporter. It says sex in movies has dropped sharply, yet gotten more graphic, study says. I'll link to it in the show notes. Yeah, but that's an interesting thing, because I've had this thought about Scream 6 and Scream 5 and Scream 4 to a lesser extent. Basically, the Scream franchise from Scream 1, like past Scream 1, drops the kind of the sexual aspect of it. When it's one of the rules, like don't have sex or you're going to get killed. Right. It's really interesting. I think that it is more a cultural thing in terms of it just not being something that is in the zeitgeist in filmmaking. And what I think is interesting about that is the exclusion of it in this movie in particular is particularly more noticeable than any other type of movie, I would say, specifically because this is where like Friday the 13th is basically where that whole concept that is satirized and pointed at in Scream was from. Like, that is what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
it's interesting.
And this movie is referencing Friday the 13th Part 2, which is a sequel to a ripoff of Halloween. And there's a kill. Two people who are having sex. That is a ripoff of Bay of Blood by Mario Bava. It's so ingrained in that. It's in the DNA of the movies that this is talking about. And I just don't know. More out of curiosity than anything. Like, I don't think it's a lesser movie for being less sleazy.
Being slightly chaste.
Again, I don't want to sound like a sleazeball.
No, I don't think you do at all, for the record. Yeah.
I'm just curious if there was an effort on the director's part to be less sleazy because of modern sensibilities, or it just didn't factor into the equation.
Yeah. I mean, there is one shot of him kind of staring through a window as a woman is standing. I don't think she's fully unclothed. I think she's just in a bra.
Yeah.
So there is like a slight bit of that, but yeah, it is. Can
I do my rant? I know you're gonna. I know you already talked about The Strangers.
Oh my God! Yes.
The Strangers rant, please.
Yeah, because I will say my opening thing in my Letterboxd review is that seeing this after The Strangers Chapter 1 is it's already like it further solidifies how just bland and unimaginative Renny Harlin's movie was. But yeah, go ahead and then we can go into spoilers for In a Violent Nature.
I hated The Strangers Chapter 1. Yes. I really hated that movie a lot. The original Strangers 2008 is one of my favorite movies of all time. So this was kind of one of the first like movies I ever saw remade of like a favorite movie that came out in my life. You know, like everything else that's been remade, like I didn't grow up loving. I wasn't old enough to see its original release, but The Strangers is near and dear to me. So an example of why the sleaziness is not what's important to me. It's the context that I think matters most in a scene. The one scene, there's many scenes that I hated in Strangers Chapter 1, but the scene I hated the most was there's the scare moment. They kind of rip off the original moment where Liv Tyler's like in the kitchen and the man with the mask is like behind her. It's the movie poster. They do a version of that in this one, and after all of that scare moment, the female lead lights up a joint. Like for those of you who don't know what that is, a marijuana cigarette. And I rolled my eyes so hard because, again, we're talking about context. Like in the context of a Friday the 13th, I want them to smoke pot and be naked and then be murdered for that.
Yeah.
But in the Strangers 2008, she lights a cigarette in that scene. And there's something like, I don't smoke. I don't smoke pot. I don't smoke cigarettes. I've never done either in my entire life.
Same.
Never been interested in smoking a cigarette. Yeah. But there's something about her smoking a cigarette in that scene that's like, oh yeah, she needs a cigarette. Like I get why she is smoking a cigarette in that moment. And there's like the look as she's holding it, and like you get the pathos in that scene of the cigarette,
the stress relief,
like I need a cigarette. But in this one, because again, modern sensibilities were all like the acceptance of marijuana, and everybody just like loves pot now. Like, oh, let's forget the cigarette because cigarettes are gross and nobody smokes anymore. Let's have her smoke a joint instead. And I just like, you don't get it. You just don't get it.
It noticeably just misses the mark. Yeah,
it does. And that just bothered me so much. And I'm kind of relieved that my point isn't just senseless rambling about whatever.
Sure.
Because I think it fits when you're, it's all about the context.
Yeah.
And
like why, here's my issue, having never smoked weed or cigarettes or anything. When you're in a situation where you feel like there is maybe something dangerous happening, why is your reaction to further cloud your senses, your judgment? Like, why? Like, what is the logic behind that?
Anybody who I've ever known who has partaken would say you wouldn't do that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You wouldn't smoke pot after
you know
that.
what's
you
funny?
Just wouldn't.
You know what's funny? And this is a cheap shot, and I don't mean to be on like my high horse, no pun intended, or anything. But you know, the people that I know who are, I would say, stoners, like what they would tell you is, you know, it's not as harmful as anything else. It doesn't do anything. It's totally not addictive. And you will hear that multiple times as if it's the first time that they've told you this.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, that's my little thing. Anyway,
I don't need to see nudity and drugs in my movies. I don't, but there was, it did feel there was an absence, I think, in a movie that's an homage to that type of thing,
and so deeply rooted in that the absence of it is a little bit more pronounced than it would be otherwise. Right. And let's go into spoilers here in a second, but I do want to just really briefly share an anecdote about The Strangers Chapter 1. I don't remember. I looked in our chat or our text thread to see if I said this. I don't think I did, but to you, but I recorded the episode where I reviewed it with my friend Sam. Check that out on, I think it was last week's episode or the week before. But in it, like after I recorded it, I had the thought like, oh man, this would have been perfect to bring up here. But in The Strangers Chapter 1, almost like a majority of the like quote unquote jump scare scenes where the one of the actors are in frame and then they move and then one of the strangers is suddenly there. At no point did anyone in my theater jump or gasp or anything.
Yeah.
And 2, each time that happened, I had a flash in my brain of a memory of the scenes in Stab in Scream 2, where it is this Hollywoodification of this jump scare from like intentionally done in a Hollywood thing. That's a jump scare from like a brilliant mood piece from the original movie. Like that's the vibe I got from The Strangers Chapter 1, is that they were doing like an uninspired bit.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Welcome to our bonus review of Strangers Chapter 1 on the Excessive Viewer podcast.
Exactly. But let's get back to In a Violent Nature, and let's get into spoilers for In a Violent Nature. To kind of close out the non-spoiler review, I rated it 4 stars. Mike, you said you were rating it 3.5?
Yeah, 3.5.
Okay, nice. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and go into spoilers for In a Violent Nature. Check the show notes for timestamps if you want to navigate around that. But for now, here's a clip from the trailer for the movie.
Don't get too hung up on reason. They just keep killing.
You can cut this if you want and put it in spoilers. But did you get that there's a cameo of a Friday the 13th Part 2?
I did not. I didn't look into like how many cameos there were or anything. Is it a cameo in that scene, or were we going to talk about that? Okay,
it's the. I guess you can cut this too. It's the woman at the end of the movie in the truck.
Okay.
She's from Friday the 13th Part 2.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So I let that clip play longer than I would have usually done because that sound effect of the mashing the dude's face is just immaculate. Like the sound design in this movie is incredible.
Is it just the sound of it translating over the airwaves like I'm mishearing? But was it half of it his footsteps walking and then half of it him chopping the guy in the head?
Oh, that's a good question.
Like, did it morph into that, or am I just hearing it?
That might be you hearing it, because I haven't picked up on that. But if it is, that's really interesting.
Dang. Yeah.
I will say, and we'll probably jump around with spoilers and everything, but I do want to say just first, like, the laugh out loud moment for me. Like, this isn't a comedy. This isn't something that is reliant on parodying the genre by any stretch. But that moment where he hears him say, "I'm going to distract him."
Yes.
And you get the heartfelt, like, "Oh, I won't let anything happen to you." And then his method of distracting him is say, like, "Hey, ugly motherfucker," or whatever, "we're right here." And he's right behind him. Like,
yeah.
It is, that was perfect. I loved that.
It was great. Yeah. We laughed out loud at that part.
Nice.
So one thing I really, well, let's just talk about the best kill in the movie.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm curious which one you're.
It's the yoga kill, right?
Oh, yes. Okay.
He punches through the woman's back, like from her back to her front, hooks a hook on her head, and then pulls the hook and her head forward and back through her stomach.
It's so fucking insane.
Crazy. That was, I mean, it's so rare when you get one that you've never seen before. And I was just like, wow, that's...
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, like, what's your take on all the, like, this happens anytime, like, a gory horror movie comes out. Like, it's like, oh, people passed out in the theater, or people vomited and everything.
No way.
Yeah. I heard that in this one, and then I thought, like, yeah. And I'm like, you know, the exaggeration of that is probably from that kill particularly, because that was the most elaborate and satisfying one. It's so grotesque and creepy and aggressive for no reason.
And then I think the wood splitter moment, I kind of like, there's also a build of gnarliness as it goes. Like, the first kill is off screen, and I was kind of like, oh, I thought this was going to be, I was like, wait, I thought this was going to be like crazy violent. I thought there were like wild kills. And then he like chops the guy's head in half.
Yeah, like saws it in half at the mouth.
Yeah, that's very Friday the 13th-esque. So I was like, okay, I love that. That's an homage.
One of the only times where music is in the movie, actually.
That's right.
It's a good effect.
Playing on the cassette player.
Yeah.
The diegetic music, which becomes atmosphere, because it's like playing on slow or rewind or whatever from the...
Yeah, something like that.
If I remember correctly, if you pulled the headphones out of a Walkman, you couldn't hear it.
Oh, is that what he was doing? That is true.
When he cut his head off and he like pulls him up, the headphone jack came out and it started to play out loud so we could hear it. But I don't think.
Well, here's the thing. This movie is definitely not set in, this is present day, because it was 10 years ago, it was 2014. Yeah. So maybe it's a retro thing. There was a
moment where I thought it was going to be the 80s, and I was like, I hope it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wanted it to be set back then. And they went modern. So 10 years. This happened in 2014. Did you get the reference of the guy that he kills in the wood splitter? Who that's supposed to be?
No.
That's Tommy Jarvis.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah,
okay.
That's like him. That's like part 6. He comes back to save the day. Like, this happened to me 10 years ago. What you got to do is blah, 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 blah. He's like the hero. In fact, he had the shotgun and like the jacket, where it really felt like the creators of this movie played the game. Played Friday the 13th the game. It felt awesome. Very like trope Tommy Jarvis.
Okay. And I loved that whole sequence. Like, I'm a bit rusty on my Friday the 13th lore, so it didn't pick up on that. But I didn't pick up on that. But I loved that, like, throughout numerous times in this movie, like, there's the whole like grizzled old curmudgeonly guy, and I guess it was that ranger character talking about like, oh, you know, you need to stop setting traps because you're gonna do this. You're gonna meet an animal in the forest that you're not gonna be prepared for. It's like that's what I reference as being like, oh, it's a little on the nose, but it's the first one, so that's fine.
Yep.
But when you get to the point where it's getting more into the dialogue of the survivors or the people that are about to get killed, it's just so like it feels like it is representing moments from a complete movie from the other from that perspective. Like it feels lived in. It feels like they put care into writing the dialogue for the most part. So like when you have him like taking charge and telling him to go get the chains and moving the shotgun over to him, like even the kind of just hacky like I can't do it, I'm too scared to chain him up. Like that's such an inherently slasher conceit that I was floored. I loved it.
Yep. Yeah, and the chains are very Friday the 13th Part 6, which is Tommy Jarvis, right? We got to take him back to the lake. The only way to get him is to take him back to the lake or wherever that shack was for Johnny.
Yep.
And then, so skip forward to the ending. Is that okay?
Yes. Let me try to think of any other. Let's talk about that. What was it? The woodcutter thing?
Yeah, the wood splitter.
The wood splitter. I thought that was that was very that was very good. I don't know. I don't know. It was good.
To take his arm off first.
That is, and like, did he intentionally paralyze him before doing that? Was that that was just, oh man, that was rough. That was insane.
Very violent.
Very
violent.
But let's kind of skip over to the end a little bit. You had mentioned that it is 10 minutes longer than what the movies that it's aping usually are. And it's funny you say that, because I definitely felt that. Like, I was checking my watch and I was like, okay, I've got 7 minutes left. It's when she's in the truck and like she's to safety. I'm like, there's like, I mean, granted, there's gonna be like 4 or 5 minutes of credits, but like, man, this is a lot of movie left for this short of a time. And I don't know, that ending ultimately was a little bit disappointing to me. I did like the final shot, just kind of staring into the woods. But ultimately it was a little unfulfilling to me. But I understand now that you mentioned it, that it's a cameo. That, like, can you expand on that? Because I was in the dark.
A couple things. A little jargony here, but 99% of all Hollywood movies, like we talk about the first, the second, and third act. And you've maybe heard that on this podcast. If you know what I'm talking about, I apologize, but to the non movie watching crowd, I don't know. Some people don't know what I'm talking about when I say the third act.
I would say people seeking out movie podcasts would know.
They know. Okay. Yeah. So hopefully. Third act structure is incredibly, incredibly popular. And funny enough, last couple of weeks, I've seen a couple of movies that try like a fourth act. And this movie, I call it maybe epilogue, I guess. But there's not much of a third act of this movie. It almost cheats a little on the third act, right? Because we're not invested in the survival of the characters, especially when we're in Johnny's perspective. There's no payoff for him or anything, right? So the third act is like whisper thin, and then there's this fourth act that is like from the perspective of who we would traditionally call the final girl. That was a little strange to me.
Yes. And it was overall unsatisfying, specifically because we didn't have the traditional like third act. Like you said, we didn't have the traditional third act showdown with the final girl and the villain. Like we didn't have, like, that's completely absent. She sets the locket down and leaves.
Correct.
And like that, it didn't sit well with me, because I feel like it should have maybe been a little bit more. There should have been more to it than that.
So much of the movie is going for this subtle, like, let's not take it too seriously, or like nothing needs more attention than it needs. You know what I mean? Like nothing needs more gravitas. Nothing is played heavy.
Yeah.
And I feel like the ending is kind of also played like with a bit of a shrug. Not the ending, but like the third act, right? The end for the campers is played with a bit of a shrug, and it's like, oh, you could have given us something.
Yeah.
There.
It was so much so that the epilogue scene, as you called it, is so lengthy, which I understand now in retrospect is probably just because of the cameo aspect of it. But in the moment, I'm like, okay, we didn't have like a traditional like finale or climax to the story. Is this like I was trying to pay close attention to the what she was saying, because I was like, is it going to lead to a reveal that she's actually Johnny's mother, and it's going to be like an interesting riff on Friday the 13th in a different way? But no, it's not.
Right.
Like it just felt empty and
no, it doesn't. It's like they just wanted to get this woman on screen, which I guess is okay. So I've referenced Friday the 13th Part 2 many times. So that character at the end in the truck, very Texas Chainsaw, picked the girl up in the truck.
Yep.
Lauren Marie Taylor, who played Vicky in Friday the 13th Part 2. So she dies in Part 2. She's not the final girl. And she just kind of vamps a little bit and soliloquizes. And
it's something that at the end of the day, like the whole point of that monologue is like, oh, you know, the animals can't be contained or can't be controlled. It's in their nature and everything. And like, it's like, I have trouble with that because that it feels incredibly on the nose, and especially on the nose given that the entire movie is from the perspective of this animalistic character, like killer. Like we got it. Like, like that's
what the movie is.
Yeah, from the jump when the ranger refers to like possible like creatures in the forest, like he's talking about him, he's talking about Johnny,
and worse, I think the very end, the last shot of the movie suggests that he's done. So what?
Yeah, that's a good
done with her.
Well, yeah, done with her. Like
I love the moment where she gets out of the truck and she's looking into the woods, and
it
stays there for like 3 or 4 beats. He's going to jump out, and then he doesn't. I think that's great, and I think that's inspired. Yeah,
it reminds me of the line that I don't know, the line from the Maxine trailer. It's like through her trauma, she addresses the camera. I don't know. It just makes me laugh. But anyway. That's a great closing shot, and the locket being gone. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it could be that he's done, or it could be that he's got the locket, now he's just gonna roam around killing people forever. I don't know.
I suppose I kind of got the sense that it was like, he got it. It worked. Her plan worked. He's got it. And he's just done, which like,
which would be fine if there wasn't also a line of dialogue earlier where like it's explicitly stated, you can't just give it back.
That won't work. Yeah.
Like it would have been fun if there was like some goofy like ritual that has to be done, or some trap that's like actually set for him. Like that would have been a far better third act finale in terms of having just closing it out with like a big like ritualistic sort of thing from the killer's perspective would have been satisfying. But
the movie really plays the whole thing very like, as much as it's an homage to those movies we're talking about, it's not like sacrosanct, right? I don't think nothing has a whole lot of gravitas. Nothing is I'm tired brain, I guess, but I can't think of the word. Like nothing is super serious in this movie. It's not a funny movie, but at all. but they're not playing anything for grandiosity.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like they had earned some by the end of it.
Oh, absolutely. They were laying the groundwork for it.
Right. That they could have gone a little bigger at the end rather than just
And it could 100% be an issue of budget. Maybe they just couldn't do it. Maybe they just couldn't do it.
Yeah, right.
There could be other constraints to it, but ultimately that is slightly a bit of a letdown in the end. But I still overall
getting
enjoyed
there was
it.
fun.
Yeah, absolutely. That didn't detract from the 4 stars for me. I really enjoyed it. So
no, I think that says a lot. It's well-deserved 4 stars, and I think there's a 4.5 star movie in there.
Oh, absolutely.
But just not quite.
Yep. Yeah. So, any other thoughts on In a Violent Nature?
Not really, except that I'm excited to see when it gets a wider release. Is anybody going to see this movie in theaters? I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably not.
I hope so, because this seems like it'd be a good theater experience. With
the thing
right
about movies in theaters is that nobody goes to them to see movies.
Yeah. I had an experience today that was just like, not bad, but it was just like the guy in front of me in line when I got my ticket for Furiosa. Like, the guy was buying his ticket at the front of the theater, and it was clear that he probably hasn't been in the movie theater recently, I would say. But like, the interaction was the woman working was like, or he was like, I would like one for Furiosa, and she's like, okay, just select the seat that you want. The A's are close to the screen. The others are H's are to the back. And then he's like, oh, okay. And then he's like, but when I get in there, I can just sit wherever I want, right? And like, in my head, I'm like, no, that.
Yeah,
and,
what?
Yeah. And she was like, no, there are assigned seats. And he's like, okay, I'll just pick this one that's close to the middle. And I'm like, are you really that put out by it? Like, why don't you download the app or something? I don't know.
Or you're in there now picking the seats.
Yes.
That's your. What do you mean?
Yeah.
When I'm in there, I can pick
sit wherever I want. Like, no, you can't, because these seats are taken.
What I'm saying is, you can sit wherever you want. You're choosing it now.
Yes, exactly.
That's yes.
Yeah.
When I'm in there, can I sit wherever I want? Yes.
Just
pick now, please.
Yes.
So stupid.
It's so frustrating. Yep. But anyway, if you're listening, please still listen.
Welcome to the Stranger Things Chapter 1 bonus podcast.
Yes. Okay. So that should do it for this review. Any parting thoughts on In a Violent Nature? Any other things?
No, just excited to see if people see it and what they say about it.
Nice. Well, if you see it and you want to let us know what you think, go ahead and you can write to me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. Mike, where can people reach you online?
That's a good question. Instagram, as good as it gets, music as _good_ as _ basically as good as it gets, music with underscores. And nice. Actually, we're kind of flying under the radar. This is a first time announcement. This is
nice.
The announcement. We have a new song coming out on June 5th.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
Yeah. And just apologize for being a little how would you describe my behavior right now? Like purposely Luddite. Like I'm kind of anti-internet lately.
Sure.
And so we've taken a lot of like our music stuff. Like, you can find all our music, but we're not really on social media and the internet actively anymore. We're still a band. We still make music. But I'm trying to see what happens if we release the song and don't have any lead up and anticipatory advertisements or announcements or anything. It's just this is the announcement, and then
nice.
The 5th single will drop. And I just want to see what happens. So awesome. New single, As Good as It Gets. The single is called Honey and Bloodstains, and it comes out on June 5th.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. I'm excited to check it out, and the title is, appropriate for this review.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, that'll do it for the featured review this week. I will go into the secondary review here in a moment. But Mike, thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. Always a pleasure. Obviously, love you, dude.
Yeah. Love you too, man.
Yeah. So, anything else before we go?
That'll do it, man.
All right. Well, follow Mike and his band, As Good As It Gets. Links in the show notes. And we're going to go into the secondary review after this little snippet to bring us in.
They tell me I view obsessively.
And before we get to our secondary review, I want to take a quick moment to remind you that if you like the show, please take a moment to follow us on social media and subscribe to and rate the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or whatever your preferred podcast app is. And don't forget to subscribe to the Obsessive Viewer Podcast YouTube channel as well, where I post more and more videos and live streams of podcasts and all that. And also, if you're interested in starting a podcast of your own, you can go to Libsyn and use promo code OBSESS when you sign up for a new account. You'll get up to 2 months free depending on when you sign up, and we'll get a commission on it as well. More details on that in the show notes. And now back to the show, and let's go into my secondary review of the evening. This is a review of Babes, and to bring us into that, I'm going to play a clip from the trailer, and this is going to be a non-spoiler review of Babes. So here's a clip from the trailer.
It's so good. Oh my god, I feel like I have to shit. Oh my god, did I just shit on my baby?
No, it's more like you babied on your shit.
I've never been cummed inside Raleigh. I am a pregnant person.
Girl.
All right, so that was a clip from the trailer of Babes. This movie is in theaters. It was released in theaters on May 23rd, 2024. And the plot summary, courtesy of IMDb, is lifelong friends Eden and Dawn, one single and wanting a baby, and the other already a mother, navigate challenges to their bond when Eden pursues pregnancy alone after a one-night stand. This movie was directed by Pamela Adlon, and writers were Alana Glazer and Josh Rabinowitz. And the cast includes Alana Glazer, Michelle Buteau, Hassan Minaj, John Carroll Lynch, Stefan James, and Oliver Platt. So like I said, this movie is in theaters right now, and it was released on May 23rd. So this movie, if you could tell from the trailer, is a fairly raunchy comedy, but it has a lot of heart to it as well. So it's not just this raunchy comedy about, Alana Glazer saying filthy things or behaving like a wild card character in a comedy. It's not really that type of comedy per se. It's more of a friendship drama and comedy to an extent. It's really pretty interesting because it's definitely something that is puts in the effort to tell a human story of these two friends. And so the kind of main premise of the movie, as outlined in the plot summary I just read, is that this movie is about two friends. One who is married, lives in like the Upper West Side or something like that of New York, and she just had her second baby, and everything's working out. Eden, played by Alana Glazer, is in a lesser comedy, she would have been like the ne'er-do-well kind of Arrested Development, resistant to grow up sort of character, but there's a lot more layers to her character in this movie, and it kind of defies that kind of stereotype or that archetype of that type of character in a comedy, which I feel was pretty refreshing at the end of the day, because you kind of expect it to be just a raunchy comedy and kind of a hokey like personal growth story. But it's just a lot more layered than that. And a big part of that is due to the fact that that plot summary is somewhat misleading because it says one single and wanting a baby. I don't know if that's necessarily the case per se. Basically, the movie begins with Eden and Dawn. Dawn is about to give birth, and she goes to the hospital. She gives birth to her baby, and then Eden, played by Alana Glazer, she takes the train home, and she meets Stefan James there. They have an instant connection. They share a lot of personal details and stuff. They have a one-night stand, and then she becomes pregnant, and he is not involved in the movie from there. I'll say that much. There's stuff to his character that comes into play, but I won't say exactly what it is for fear of spoilers. But essentially, she is faced with the prospect of being a single mother and carrying this pregnancy alone. And because of that, she exercises this somewhat like this one-sided codependent relationship she has with Dawn, with her best friend, who they've been best friends since childhood. And it's a case where, like, Dawn is someone who has grown up and kind of probably in a more conventional friendship or a less toxic friendship. They would have grown apart a little bit more than they do. But since Eden is more aggressive in the fact that she and Dawn are like they're like family. They tell each other everything. They are incredibly close. And Eden kind of clings to that, while Dawn is aware of it, but also she has her own family. She has a family that she is raising. She has a marriage that is maybe not in the best state right now because of the stresses of, raising two kids together. And so the attention that Dawn needs to give in her life is to her relationship, to her kids, to her husband, and Eden kind of falls by the wayside throughout the movie. And that's something I found really compelling among like very funny comedic bits, but I found that drama pretty compelling because it's not setting it up as a stunted, emotionally stunted person reckoning with the realization that their codependent on one side relationship has ceased to be as forgiving and nurturing of that codependency. Instead, it is about someone who is in a situation. Eden is pregnant, and she is in a situation where she isn't like vocal about this throughout it, but it's all through subtext, where she's in a situation, being the pregnancy, where she has no one else, and she needs Dawn by her side. She needs her best friend. And there is like this subtlety to it that she's kind of using Dawn in place of a partner or family, like blood relative family. But because Dawn is in a situation where she has a newborn baby and a young child, like 2-year-old child at home, and they live far away from Eden, like there's that situation that comes up where Eden feels slighted by Dawn, and Dawn feels that she can't devote her attention to both her family and her friend as forces in her life that need to feed off of her energy, because that leaves her with nothing. And that's kind of the overview of the entire movie, like the point of the movie, basically. And from there, it just really dives into some pretty good, subtle subtext and explores like concepts of friendship and boundaries and relationships like that. And it doesn't really offer any easy, well, it does. I won't say it doesn't offer easy answers or anything. It does have kind of a standard ending for this type of movie. But the ride there is pretty satisfying, and it's pretty compelling in terms of a family, like not family, but a friendship drama. And there's some really funny lines. There's some really funny bits throughout it. John Carroll Lynch is okay. He plays the doctor that Eden sees throughout the course of her pregnancy. And he is someone who has like a recurring shtick throughout the entire movie where each time he's on screen, it's like, oh, I'm trying something new with my hair. And it's like his first scene is something like, are you sure you want to go through with this or something? I don't remember what it is, but he says like, or are you as naive as I am, thinking that I can still pull off this comb over? Like little self-deprecating things like that. And that's fine. It's solid. But there's a lot of better comedy throughout it. There's one thing in particular that I'm not going to spoil anything about the specifics of it, but basically the aftermath of Eden babysitting Dawn's son. She does something while babysitting, like she shows him an inappropriate movie for his age, and the fallout of that had me cracking up. I was not like uncontrollably or anything, but I was laughing pretty hard in the theater because it took me by surprise. It was very, very satisfying, very funny. And it carries through a little bit throughout more of the movie, but it was pretty good. It was pretty good. As far as performances are concerned, they're good. They're very solid. Alana Glazer and Michelle Buteau, they have incredible chemistry. I think I read that they've actually been friends for like 20 years. So that chemistry comes through completely on screen, like 100%. I will say this is not important to the review or anything, but I did think it was funny that the movie is bookended by movie theaters scenes. So like the opening scene is Eden and Dawn meeting for this tradition that they do where every Thanksgiving they go see a movie together. So they go see a movie and you see on the marquee that Everything Everywhere All at Once is playing, and a couple other movies from 2019. And then the movie ends, like it's bookended with a scene at the movie theater, and you see that the movies playing are most noticeably The King of Staten Island. And I had the thought that like, yeah, this is interesting because I actually don't know if The King of Staten Island played in theaters, because at that point were theaters completely shut down? Because it was 2020, and I think The King of Staten Island went straight to digital. So maybe it was when theaters were completely shut down. But it's interesting to see The King of Staten Island on the marquee, and like one part thinking like, oh, okay, is this a universe where the pandemic didn't happen, or are these characters going to have a very unique experience in the months to come after the credits roll because COVID and the pandemic and everything? So I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Had no bearing on the actual review or anything, or my enjoyment of the movie. I did end up enjoying this movie quite a bit. I ended up rating it 3.5 stars, and overall, it's one of the better and more memorable of this type of movie. This type of movie that's like a codependent friendship where the scales get tipped a little bit and things go awry, and it forces the characters to confront that codependent level within them, among them, and to confront how they've changed as people throughout their lives as they've been together throughout their lives. And also how they manage life changes and everything. So I do recommend seeing it. I'm running out of things to say. I don't really have anything else really to say about it. I do kind of wish there was a little bit more emphasis on Dawn as a character, Michelle Buteau, because we get a lot of the scenes of her dealing with like the hardships of raising two kids and the pressure that puts on her marriage. I kind of wish we would have seen more of her home life, because what we see of her and Hassan Minhaj playing the character of Marty, what we see of them is often through the perspective of Eden when she is like coming over or trying to communicate with them, talking to them. And that's fine. That's okay. But I kind of wish that there was maybe one more scene of just Dawn and Marty together, without Eden and without even the aura of Eden around them, in terms of, you know, her being in a position where she needs Dawn's attention, or she needs to be the center of attention. There are scenes like that are just strictly Marty and Dawn, and I'm not saying that there aren't scenes of them together. Just my memory of the movie is that there were at least the emphasis, or the more memorable scenes involving them, were from the perspective of Eden, who's like dropping by with like a bag of chips and like dropping in an inopportune time, or babysitting their kids while they have a date night, or they leave. Like it's kind of different there. The big dramatic finish, or the moment where Dawn and Eden come to a point where they're confronting this kind of thing between them, in terms of the drama about them, and like the lack of attention that Eden has, or that Eden is getting from Dawn, and how the effects of Dawn's life has just made it very hard for her to function properly. The confrontation scene about where those issues come to light and they talk it out, it's pretty good. It's really well written. I think the circumstances of it are pretty unique, because it kind of flips the perspective a little bit, or flips the archetypes of the characters. So early in the movie, obviously, it's, as you could hear in the trailer, there is a little bit of an emphasis on Ilana Glazer's character Eden being kind of not free spirit, but kind of a someone who doesn't really have their life together, and is still kind of reckless and ready to party and drink and do drugs, and like all that archetype. By the end of the movie, it's interesting, because obviously she is experiencing pregnancy, and we have Dawn, who is wanting to break free of the stress of her home life. So they go on a baby moon, with like just the two of them, with Eden pregnant, obviously. And throughout that sequence, Dawn is trying to capitalize on the party atmosphere, and trying to be like the party person that they were together before, you know, the pregnancy, and before they became grown-ups, essentially. And it's just interesting to see that flip, even though early in the movie, Eden's sort of persona isn't really in keeping with that persona. And when we get to that switch where Dawn is experiencing kind of a more free spirit thing, because she's out of the house and out like on vacation, essentially, it is to an extreme that doesn't match where Eden is at the beginning of the movie. So it's not a one-to-one switch around or anything, but it was still effective storytelling and still really well done. And it brought out some good drama in that kind of prerequisite confrontation scene that they have at the end of the movie. So overall, pretty satisfying. I rated it 3.5 stars out of 5. I recommend checking it out. It's pretty solid. If you like a raunchy comedy that has a bit more subtlety and a little bit more nuance in terms of characterization of two characters who are lifelong friends, who have different views of that friendship in terms of how codependent they are on each other and how much they need each other. If you want to see that explored and those themes explored, I recommend Babes. It's pretty good, and it's pretty funny too. There's some very memorable, funny parts in it. So that's Babes. It is in theaters now. I am not going to do anything for Potpourri because I need to get this episode posted, because I'm actually recording this a couple nights after I recorded the review with Mike. But so having said that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the episode. So, first of all, thank you guys so much for listening. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Make sure to follow the show on social media and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Also, check out Obsessive Viewer Podcast's other shows, Tower Junkies, a Stephen King podcast, hosted by Tiny and myself, and Anthology, the Twilight Zone and Classic Sci-Fi podcast, hosted by me. next week on the show, I will be reviewing Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, and the new Richard Linklater movie, Hitman. So stay tuned for that. Until then, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. And now, enjoy this short clip from a recent Patreon-exclusive episode. For the full episode and more Patreon-exclusive content, sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And goes after Holden. And I really liked this showdown because it also does feel like this end of the book really feels like it is paying off those feelings, those kind of themes of the Wild West, because we have that showdown between Way and Amos, and then Murtry coming in and taking it. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our episodes, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on this show, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, visit obsessiveviewer.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and grow our community. If you want to support the show and get early access to new episodes, as well as a steady stream of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For information on more podcasts presented by obsessiveviewer.com, visit obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.